Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
We're serving companies that are growing really rapidly, changing fast. They constantly have to adapt. They're often disrupting in the market. And those companies are scaling really rapidly. And they need solutions that can scale their business, their finance org, their partner ecosystem rapidly as well with them. And so we've been really built from day one for those types of companies.
That was Rob Israch, the Chief Marketing Officer for Tipalti, and he is our special guest this week. This is episode 49 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. And hey, before we get started, if you happen to office in Houston, Austin, or North Texas, check out Fuse Workspace, where their mission is to help others do more. Check them out at fuseworkspace.com. Okay, back to the show. Rob has been with Topolte for 6 years and runs marketing and all alliances for the company. He grew up in South Florida and moved up and down the East Coast and then finally to the West Coast, where he's been for the last 20 years. His family's originally from South Africa. Topolte is a comprehensive global payments automation solution that automates all manual supplier payment processes. Its customers typically wipe out 80% of their payables workload, enabling them to focus on mission-critical initiatives. Topolte helps strengthen compliance and financial controls, avoid future AP headcount requirements, accelerate the financial close by 25%, and employ AP best practices. We've got a great episode this week with Rob, so let's get started. Hi, Rob. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Greg.
Great. So let's dive right in. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
Yeah, sure. My name is Rob Israch. I am CMO for Topolte. Been at Topolte 6+ years now. I can go into my background and talk about the personal side of things. So I've been at Topolte for 6 years. I run all marketing and alliances for the company. Prior to Topolte, I was at NetSuite, which is a cloud ERP provider, the first cloud ERP provider that existed. I was there for 8 years, so several years before the company went public and then many years after. And at NetSuite, I ran global marketing, branding, and demand generation functions. Prior to that, I was at Intuit in their QuickBooks division, as well as a acquired division prior to that. And then I was with GE prior to that in their GE Capital division. So I've been a marketer my whole life. Certainly I've done some other functions along the way too, but at my heart, I'm a marketer. In terms of kind of my personal background, I grew up in Florida, in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, and then moved all up and down the East Coast and then eventually to the West Coast. And I've been out here in San Francisco for 20+ years now. So love it out here, but have lived pretty much all over the country. My family is originally from South Africa, so I'm actually the first U.S. citizen in the family. And I've spent quite a bit of time, probably over a year of my life out in South Africa on various trips and vacations, seeing the family.
Nice. Well, let's talk about Topolte. Tell us a little bit about what the company does.
Yeah, so, we really focus on the payables process and automating, modernizing it for companies around the world. We both operate in what we call mass pay workflows, which is more typical in the digital economy and the gig economy space, as well as your more traditional accounts payable function that most companies operate in. And so we modernize and automate and scale those processes for pretty much companies across those ranges of workflows we talked about. We do focus on high velocity companies, so high growth companies, oftentimes VC funded or fast scaling, fast growing companies. Largely that is mid-market size companies, so not super small, not mom and pop liquor stores, and certainly not the Fortune 5,000. We do have small businesses, we do have large business clients, but we focus on those mid-sized companies who are increasing complexity, growing rapidly, changing rapidly, innovating, disrupting, and the such. And so that's kind of our sweet spot.
Okay. And how big is the company?
We've been growing really fast. So we're over 300 now, approaching 400. And we expect that growth to continue pretty aggressively next year. We just got a round of 150 million funding and pretty excited about. We have a valuation of over 2 billion now, which is really really exciting. And so we're investing heavily in the company in both engineering and sales and business development and marketing. and across the business and customer facing roles to help us scale and really take advantage of opportunity and increase our brand awareness and penetration across our target accounts.
Okay. And how do you go to market? Do you have a direct sales force, through partners, a little bit of both?
A little bit of both, frankly. So we have a direct sales team, direct sales executives who call into accounts. We have an SDR team that supports those sales executives, of course, both catching leads that are generated by marketing and qualifying them, moving them forward to sales, as well as do outbounding into our target account list to try and get attention. I'm a marketer by background, but we're fairly aggressive on the marketing front in terms of getting our brand out there, generating demand, and just making sure that people know that we exist and improving that over the course of time. And then I oversee our alliances group, and we do have a BD function that has several hundred partners around the world. And those partners, when they have clients who are a good fit for our solutions or have a need or pain that relate to what our solution addresses, they refer that business over to us. And then they partner with our sales team to bring those clients on board and make sure it's a good experience. And then, of course, we've got implementation teams and customer success teams and support teams to make sure our clients are very happy.
Okay. Are there certain verticals that you focus on or are better for your products than others?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. So we are horizontal. We have customers across a very broad range of industries, healthcare, manufacturing, e-commerce, software and tech, and then subgroups, things like online marketplaces, internet-based companies, ad tech, and various other kind of groups of companies, gaming and the such like that. I mentioned a little earlier how we're one of the few solutions in the space that can both address mass pay workflows and accounts payable workflows, which are typically invoice-backed. There's typically only solutions in the payable space that can either do an invoice-backed, more traditional AP workflow or a high-volume mass pay workflow, but those types of folks don't typically, if you think of ClassPass, which is one of our clients, for example, if ClassPass had their partners and forced them to send an invoice every single time they provided a service, those partners wouldn't be very happy because it's additional paperwork for them and hassle for those partners. And they might consider joining another service because that partner or that payment experience is a part of that partner touchpoint experience. And so that type of situation will be more of a mass pay workflow where essentially the marketplace or the internet-based company, the digital company, has their own analytics system where they know what services have been rendered by their partners, and they then pay people in mass across the world based on that analytics data they have. Similar if you think of an Uber, right? Uber has drivers around the world. If they started making their drivers start sending an invoice every time they drive 2 miles for one of their clients, the drivers would get frustrated by it. They don't want to be doing paperwork and they'd move to Lyft the next day. And so that partner payment experience is really, really critical. Those folks tend to use a mass pay workflow, which we handle. They may also have an accounts payable workflow by their finance team within the group. We also handle that. Many other companies, like your typical software company or e-commerce business or healthcare, education, if you will, all those companies would have what you typically would consider a more traditional finance process of an AP process or an invoice. So we handle both those, but kind of tying back to your question, we tend to see is that mass pay workflow tends to be used heavily in certain spaces, such as the gig economy, online marketplaces, internet-based companies, ad tech, gaming, affiliate networks, influencer networks, monetization networks, apps and audio and video and such like that. And so those modern economies, which are some of the fastest growing economies in the world right now, and certainly disrupting spaces left and right, is one of our strong suits. And our mass pay solution is a great fit for those folks with the capability. So we do go really deep there. And then the AP workflow spaces like software, business services, manufacturing, healthcare, education are all great spaces for us, but we're pretty horizontal. We can pretty much serve any industry with both those capabilities we have.
Okay. And so I would assume your target is probably CFOs within these organizations?
Yeah, CFOs, controllers, those are definitely our top 2 targets. Certainly VP of finance or finance director also relevant. Larger deals, you might get a CIO involved or a head of IT. In that digital economy space I mentioned earlier with MassPay, product managers are sometimes involved, sometimes the VP of publishers or freelancers or contractors or talent or whatever they call their payees for that business model. Sometimes those folks will get involved in a deal because, it's in their best interest to keep their partners happy and retained. So, but the core focus is, you're correct, CFO, controller are top two targets we like to speak with.
Sure. And how has COVID affected the business?
It's been a pleasant surprise, to be quite honest. When we heard about when COVID really started kind of rolling and there was the uncertainty in the market, we wanted to be cautious and we certainly didn't want to have to lay anyone off. So we paused headcount. We did a hiring freeze, with the expectation that that would hold. We've actually done really well in the first half of this year, which is when COVID hit. We ended up growing 82%. Versus the same period the previous year. So we've been really fortunate versus a lot of other companies. I'm sure if it weren't for COVID, we might have even grown faster. But, 82%, we're pretty happy about that. And we, after a few months of seeing that it has not slowed down our customers, it has not slowed down demand and interest in our solutions, we decided to turn back on the hiring machine. And so we've been actually growing and hiring quite rapidly since then. And we're building out our talent acquisition team and our recruiting team and pretty much every team in the business. So we've been very fortunate. I think partially it's because we tend to work with more modern companies and, all those digital economy companies I mentioned earlier, but also we're very deep in the tech and the software space and, many other spaces within healthcare. We were pretty deep in the med tech space and the telehealth space and education. We're deep in the ed tech space because of that affinity towards technology-driven companies and more aspirational, aggressive companies, as well as companies who are more global in nature. I think we've really kind of gone through the friction of COVID-19 better than many companies have. I think the other trend there is automation is a continuing trend, of course, automation, AI, and some of the application of these technologies. But I think what we're seeing with COVID-19, which has been also a pleasant surprise from a business perspective, is it's accelerated those trends. It hasn't delayed them. And so people that were on the fence said, I really do want to automate my payables operation or look at scaling my financial operation. They started looking at it more seriously with this, and it became more of a mandate versus something, a can you can keep kicking down the road until you're ready for it. And I think things like work from home exacerbated it. That, if you have a check signing process, for example, that totally fails in a COVID environment. You can have checks being handed from one person to another and then they're signing it physically and the such like that. And it actually exposes you to things like fraud and the such like that if you don't have these processes modernized and digitized. And so trends like that also then kind of along with automation accelerated, it looks like, with COVID-19. So I consider us fortunate and lucky, both from an industry exposure perspective as well as the types of value that we bring in kind of the market's increasing adoption of that technology to help streamline the organization.
Right. I forget who said it. You may remember, but someone said people's digital transformation initiatives that were 3 to 5 year roadmaps are now being executed in 6 months or less.
It's absolutely 100%. I was at NetSuite during the Great Recession and it was brutal, but we came out of that flying because back then the innovative technology of the day was cloud. And the market just moved all the way over to cloud really rapidly because of that. And so that's what tends to happen with these types of corrections, recessions, or situations. And so it appears that COVID-19 has done that as well.
Yeah, well, great. So tell us what differentiates your company from your competitors.
Absolutely. I think, when we look at the market across those different industries we talked about in the segments and the such, we're serving companies that are growing really rapidly, changing fast. They constantly have to adapt. They're often disrupting in the market. And those companies are scaling really rapidly. And they need solutions that can scale their business, their finance org, their partner ecosystem rapidly as well with them. And so we've been really built from day one for those types of companies. We're a robust system. We're a holistic system that addresses the whole process. And because we've been built for that type of archetype of company, we're very adaptable. We're very agile. We're feature rich in that as companies grow and they change, they're able to bring us on really quickly and we keep growing and scaling with them and supporting their growth. And so it's really that ability to scale with the companies and not having a solution in place that they have to keep ripping and replacing and having to change systems and bring on new people and such like that. And so our ability to partner with companies as they keep growing is really the key piece. When I say kind of ability to partner, it does come down to the technology. And so the system is built from day one, frankly. It's our founder kind of meets a vision from day one where he didn't look at you probably speak with a lot of folks who are deep in the payment space and folks in the payment space, maybe the banking space, they tend to nerd out about payment methods and payment rails and fastest payment and the such like that. And those are all relevant. But the perspective our founder had was that this is a process ultimately. And he sat down with customers in the very early days when we found out about the problem. And I could talk a little bit about how the company was birthed and where the idea came from. But he spent a lot of time sitting down with actual customers across a variety of industries and really sitting down and watching what their process is. And they would describe it as a mass payment problem or accounts payable problem or an invoice processing problem. When he actually looked at their process, he realized, way before they make a payment, you have to onboard these suppliers or partners. And if they're onboarding many partners at once, for example, you're often having data entry typo errors that are being done by the finance team, which isn't a good use of their time. And if they've erred there, they're not validating the payment information up front. Guess what you have later when you make a payment? You have a much higher payment error rate. And so he connected the dots of that, things like tax, things like fraud detection, of course, things like invoice processing, if that's a process you have, things like OFAC, regulatory requirements and controls that make sure you further eliminate fraud and you can pass audits and all that good stuff. The communications back to the partners after payments made is critical. And the last thing finance wants to be doing is constantly talking with suppliers about where's my payment? When's it coming? Why is there an issue? How do we resolve this issue? Let's go to a bank portal and, dance around five different bank portals. Global payments is a huge pain point for companies. We have clients who had like 6 different bank portals before they came to us, and they were able to consolidate it all into one, streamline their time, and also process like payment reconciliation, financial close in particular. So it's very much a holistic platform that automates and modernizes, consolidates, centralizes, streamlines that end-to-end workflow. And because of that, it really helps these companies scale. They have one place to go as their business changes. Let's say they add new global territories, new partners around the world, new subsidiaries in a different geo. If they're getting audited, they need to step up their financial controls, or they're identifying a raise in fraud. We have modules for that. Because we have all those capabilities, that as the company grows, as they become more robust, they're able to just simply scale with us with a click of the button, more or less. One of the reasons that attracted me when I was at NetSuite to Topolte is the ROI. And so that holistic approach basically brings about an 80% reduction in workload that's related to the payables process. And if you look at that payables process within the finance function itself, it is the number one most time-consuming function in the finance operation. That's multiple surveys of controllers and CFOs across multiple associations have reinforced that. There's nothing else that's close in terms of how manual and legacy that process is. And so we really help modernize it. But that level of automation we have around 80%, I haven't seen in a technology, frankly. And it's not an aggressive number, frankly. We have clients that are 87.5%, 92.5%, 95%. And so 80% is kind of in the middle. And so it's a pretty huge level of workload automation, frees up finance to really focus on what they went to college and what they really would like to do, not, registering new suppliers or processing invoices or jumping into 5 different horrible bank portals and making payments en masse over and over again. And as a company grows and scales, of course, the last thing you want to do is keep hiring more and more accounts payable clerks to keep making payments. You want to put those in finance functions that add value to the company, like, FP&A, or maybe use them to hire more salespeople or product people or engineers or marketing folks to really help your company innovate and grow and disrupt people. And so, it's that scaling, that efficiency are a key piece. The other pieces that make us distinct, aside from that holistic approach, we're really robust when it comes to financial controls, which as you're growing in the very early days, let's say you're a 20-person company, you're not worried about that, right? You're just trying to survive. You're just trying to grow, make sure you have enough funding, of course, and such like that. Once you get 50, 100, 200, 300 employees, type companies and beyond, it is really important that you have controls in place so you don't fail audits, you don't have fraud, you're not wasting money that way, you're prepared from a tax and IRS perspective, you have the regulatory controls in place, and of course, things like cost controls, cash flow controls as well. And so our system has all that built in, and it's all automated, right? That, again, you don't want to ideally, you don't want to throw more and more bodies at controlling those problems. But the area of the payables function is rife with risk on that side. And so we really kind of set you up with best practices from day one on that side. And then the final piece is global. We are by far and away the most advanced global system in the landscape on the payables process. When you say global, a lot of people think of just cross-border payments, and it's absolutely something we do. We pay out in 196 countries, 120 plus currencies, 6 different payment methods. We have things like OFAC checking prior to every single payment, approval workflows for payments, et cetera. So we're really robust on that side. And we're architected, we're a licensed money transmitter, similar to a PayPal model. And we actually integrate directly with folks like PayPal, with Wells Fargo, with JP Morgan Chase. So right into the banking rails. So as fast as the banking rails go, we go, versus a lot of companies just pick up their order that they get from their software and they hand it to someone else and hope that that person processes it in their timelines, which usually causes delays and a poor payment experience for the partners on the other end. But beyond the cross-border payment piece that we have, we also handle things like multi-subsidiary payable structures. Many companies that grow set up operations all over the world to both as cost centers as well as demand centers to help their business grow. Our entire system, all those different chevrons, if you will, of the process payables is designated in a multi-subsidiary architecture. So globally, we have everything you need for visibility and for controls, but the subsidiaries themselves have their own unique invoice approval workflows, payment approval workflows, visibility into their processes and the such, and they can work independently, keep moving fast and doing what they do, but you have everything you need from a corporate perspective. We handle things like intercompany transfers, FX conversion, FX hedging, global tax compliance in 50 countries. So from a global perspective, there's really no one that's more robust there. And then I'd say the final piece that we really deliver is because of everything I just talked about, of that global coverage across subsidiaries, across multiple payment methods, all in one consolidated system. And then we also have real-time integrations with accounting and ERP systems, which many of the folks that are in the space do not do. We have real-time integrations with those top accounting ERP systems. And we also really improve the business visibility into performance, into real-time spend, and the such. Typically, financial close, for example, accelerates by about 25%, which if you ask like a CFO or a controller or even a CEO or a VC or board, that's one of the top things they care about, right? Because the faster that financial close is, the faster they know how the hell their business is doing. Mm-hmm. And so the fact we connect the dots across the entire payables workflow and then even into the accounting ERP side really delivers that better business visibility to the entire business.
Right. So where do you see this payables market heading in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think from our perspective, we definitely see, of course, adoption accelerating over the course of time. I think it's at some point, it's one of the reasons I joined 6 years ago. I just looked at this and I was like, this is a no-brainer. There's no way in hell people are going to be doing this manually in a legacy way over the course of time. It's just irrational. It will be modernized. It will be automated. Finance people want to do other things with their time. They should, because they understand numbers. So I think that side for sure. We definitely see the global thing there's actually plenty of data that's come out during COVID even, where it shows that international trade has actually increased, that certain industries that rely on movement of money, movement of goods and services around the world have actually increased, not decreased. And so I think the global trend will not decline. It'll continue and accelerate. And I think with that, definitely we see our business going more and more global over the course of time. It's already our value prop, but we see so much demand coming from around the world to us already that's not in the US. I think that will accelerate. I think when I even explained what our holistic payable system does, you can make a pretty darn good argument that we go way beyond payables already. And I think generally speaking, the finance function will, of course, payables is the number one place to look at to modernize because it's such a time-consuming function and the most time-consuming function. But I think over time, finance will realize that the board, the CEO, everyone expects finance to do more. And, in COVID, they've played a role as a key strategic contributor to get through this crisis and beyond and set the company up for ongoing sustainable growth. So that pressure will only continue on finance, and the expectation of the CFO controller to play bigger will only increase. And therefore, they're going to have to look at their entire financial operation, really question parts of their operation that are manual, that take up too much time, that distract from partnering with the business to help them scale, to improve productivity, to improve visibility, to make better, faster decisions for the company, to partner with the departments on budgeting and planning. And they're going to need to reallocate their time and focus that way, as well as, of course, the CEO wants as many investments as possible going to areas that help that company disrupt and scale and grow and innovate. And so I think functions across the financial operations, as well as the banking and payments operation, are going to be questioned more and more. And again, looked at like a process, not a widget or not a payment rail, but a process, because process is really where time gets sunk into. And so they're going to look at that. I think there's some industry trends. So we talked about the digital economy and the gig economy and the internet-based economy. Those spaces all rely on those partners. And I do think that there's quite a lot, I'm sure you've interviewed folks who talked about the importance of a good payment process, both accurate, fast, accelerated speed, and the such. And I think in those spaces where those business models do really surround and rely on that partner network to run. Again, I'll go back to that Uber example, but Uber, without their drivers, at least now, I mean, if they go to automated vehicles, it might change the equation there. But right now, if Uber loses their drivers, they literally are nothing, right? I mean, they're a beautiful app, but that app is useless without their drivers. And if you think of people across, ad exchanges and ad networks and affiliate networks and influencer networks and monetization and gaming and gig economy and online marketplace, it's all the same thing. They're nothing without their partners. And I think in those spaces, on top of all those things I talked about from a strategic business perspective, finance perspective, that emphasis on having a great partner payment experience will only increase, because the competition as those spaces all keep exploding and there's more competition across verticals and sub-services is only going to increase, not decrease. And so people will start looking at that as an extension of essentially their customer experience. Just, Uber considers both their drivers and then their end customers, their buyers, as customers. And that part of the partner customer experience, the recognition that the payments is vital. And it's not just about sending accurate, fast payments, but everything, all the interactions along the way. And is it branded? And are we providing choice of payment methods and choice of currency, global coverage, communication about payment status? All that is going to be irreplaceable and increasingly important, I believe.
Sure. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk more about you. So you talked a little bit about your journey to being the CMO there, but maybe walk us back from college up until now and sort of go through sort of that journey and what it's been like.
Yeah, interesting. I don't talk about this too much, but so this will be an interesting revisiting for myself as well. So growing up, I'm a pretty creative person. I've been painting and drawing and sculpting essentially my whole life, from a very early age. My parents had to give me a room in our house to draw on the walls because I was drawing on the normal walls of the house. And so they couldn't have that. And so that's kind of like a bit of my root and the such. And I've always been very creative, but I've also actually always been very analytical. And, I ultimately decided not to go into the arts. And so I guess around high school, I would always be looking at billboards and advertisements. And I was just drawn to them for whatever reason. I think it's probably a little bit of that combination of creativity, but also analytics in terms of how I think of problems and such like that. And so I started already kind of having affinity towards advertising. I actually did an internship with a small ad agency in South Florida while I was in high school. And then in college, I kind of immediately started looking at the advertising space. I quickly realized what I really like is marketing, in that it looks at the business and looks at the problem from a more strategic lens, perhaps with advertising as a subset of it. And so I really focused there almost from year one on the marketing space. So I always knew I wanted to be a marketer because of those qualities. As you know, it's pretty hard to get a marketing job out of college. So what I ended up doing out of college was joining GE, who was a very amazing company back then. They've definitely changed over the course of time, but they're one of the world's most respected companies at that point in time. And I joined one of their leadership development programs. And I thought that would get me great exposure, great experience, and that I could kind of use essentially every 6 months, you'd have a different job, a different manager, you'd live in a different place, and you got tons of coaching. Like every 3 months, you had a pretty intense review. You had to take tons of courses along with all the work you did. And, worked in finance. I worked in e-business project management in the early days with some Sun Microsystems, folks we partnered with, competitive analysis, and I'm trying to think what the fourth project was. But it was a range of different experiences I had and, really kind of accelerated. But I was able to, a few of those, the e-business content management job, the e-business project man job, the competitive analysis, all those are marketing related. The finance job was not that marketing related. So I was able to get a marketing job out of that program with GE, did that for several years in a variety of different functions. I think it was international alliance management from a product marketing perspective, a product marketing job as kind of managed one of their brands and products, as well as event management. So I did that for a few years. And at that point, I was looking for a change. I kind of wanted a new company as well as a new place to live, frankly. And so I found a role with Intuit. They'd acquired a division up in Santa Rosa. And so that's when I moved from, at that time with GE, I was in the Northeast of the country. And I moved from the Northeast over to the Bay Area. I was living in San Francisco and commuting up to Santa Rosa, which for those of you who know the Bay Area, it's a long drive, but I figured it was worth it. I did that for several years, doing a variety of different functions. I ran SDR team, I ran demand generation, I ran customer retention marketing, which I'd done a little bit when I was at GE as well on the customer loyalty side. And so that was a really great experience. I managed several people in that role. And then Intuit decided to sell that division I was in to Sage. They moved me to headquarters for several years. And I had an interesting role where I was kind of in between sales and marketing and working with both groups in their Intuit QuickBooks Enterprise division, which was tons of business travel, and it was a good experience. But then I've been at two more mature, larger companies, and people have always told me I work more like a startup person, which I didn't quite frankly know what that means. But I took it as, I guess, a compliment. And I looked for a proper startup. And back then, NetSuite was actually a startup. There were about 250 employees. Certainly not a raw startup, but certainly not mature on the other hand. And so I looked at NetSuite. I talked to a bunch of other companies, Salesforce.com and a variety of companies in that space. And I ended up joining NetSuite. The marketing department at the time was fairly immature. They didn't have anything called demand generation or branding or anything like that. It was pretty basic in terms of function. I ended up getting I took a bit of an unusual step, but I just wanted to crack into a good startup. And so all they had at the time was an online marketing role. And so I figured I can figure that out and do that. And so I took the jump. I had some mentors that didn't suggest that move because it's, usually typically don't do that type of kind of lateral move or horizontal move or even possibly step down by going to a smaller company. But I thought it was worth the risk for me. And, I wanted that change to get that startup experience. And it was tough because I was learning new functions directly. There weren't teams of people at that company. It was me running that online marketing function. But I really kind of fine-tuned my skills by getting deep in things like paid keyword and SEO. And then I expanded the role over time to demand generation and built out the team. And we went into, all your database marketing and email marketing and drip marketing and association marketing, and basically built out the whole demand gen function for NetSuite over the course of time. And then over time, later on, I took on international marketing roles, overseeing our teams in EMEA, our marketing teams in EMEA, in Australia and Japan. So that was an amazing experience and enjoyed many trips out to those regions as well and built out the marketing teams in those functions. And it also broadened my skill set even further, of course. They did it in that role. They did fly me out to the UK for about 4 months along the way we had to do some work to kind of reestablish that marketing group out there. So that was a fun experience. And then I took on branding for the company when it was later in our maturity, and we really felt we had to do some extra things to build out our brand awareness. And so I kicked off that initiative working with agencies and cross-company on messaging and the such like that. So that was a great experience. 8 years particularly in the Bay Area, but in any area nowadays, 8 years is a lifetime in business. And so I'd been there for about 8 years. I knew, once I passed 5-6 years that I needed to start being open-minded to moving. I mean, NetSuite was doing great and I was doing well at the company. But I realized that for me to continue, I'd always known I wanted to kind of run marketing soup to nuts. And I generally learned over the course of time that I'm more of a startup person. And so I thought it was time for NetSuite at that point was, I think, 3,500 employees and the such. And I don't know, I wish I could be more complacent, but the company was probably around 500 million in annual revenue. And to some degree, we were already tipped. We already did it. And I could have rode it out for several more years and just enjoyed it. But I don't have that DNA, I guess. And I wanted more of a challenge and a test. And so I started kind of looking out for what opportunities were out there. And I didn't know about Tipalti at all. I didn't know about their brand. Their website was relatively immature, but a recruiter that had been working with me was persistent. And the CEO, Hamid, was in the city the one day for another event he was presenting at. And so I agreed to meet him for a cup of coffee. And I won't say I had like high expectations. It was just, an interview. But after 15 minutes of sitting down with him, I was really compelled. He's just a down-to-earth person, analytical, thoughtful, great track record. He's the type of person I could work with, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, person to person, not ego oozing out of his pores like you get so much in business these days, which I find personally a little disgusting. And I definitely didn't want to work with too much ego, as my next move. I don't find that enjoyable and doesn't kind of match my values and the such. Ego exists, but out of control ego is not healthy. Mm-hmm. So I really like that. I really loved his vision of the product where he had taken that holistic approach from day one. I tend to believe in that type of piece. And I'm a big, of course, proponent of marketing and sales and BD and functions. But at the end of the day, if your product isn't real, if it's not differentiated, if it's not architected right, there's a limit to what marketing and sales and other functions can do. I don't believe you can put lipstick on a pig for too long. And so this looked like a real product that was already differentiated in a huge market, in a market where I knew the competitors generally from my NetSuite days, and they weren't anything to be scared of or to be afraid of. And so I saw a lot of great things there. And then there were several things I learned over the course of time around word of mouth and customer retention, customer satisfaction, that both came out in that interview with Chen, but came out the interview with our co-founder, Oren Zev, came out through the website, and came out through a bunch of research I'd done around word of mouth and customer satisfaction. And I generally, as a marketer, I feel much more motivated when the company has a very customer-centric culture where the customers love the product and are loyal to the company. And I feel like that is the wind at the back that really helps companies fly. And I thought that the company had signatures of that. And if I could join, I could amplify that along with marketing and really help the company grow. And I'd say those were like the key factors that led me to join Tipalti. And it's worked out, right? It's been a great ride. I've learned a ton about fintech and payments along the way, which I did not have that expertise beforehand. And certainly over the past few years, I also took on alliances and business development, which has been an excellent experience. And on the marketing side, it has been really hard, but really rewarding to grow the team. There wasn't a marketing team when I joined. And so it was a team of zero, me being employee number one. But everything from recruiting had to change. And now we've got a pretty great team of 20 folks, really collaborative team, great relationship with sales, a lot of innovation across the team and some excellent marketers, some of the best marketers I've worked with in my career on the team. So it's been really rewarding. Not always easy, but really rewarding, the journey.
That's great. That's great. Well, we've covered a lot about the company, the industry, and you and your career. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think the one thing I'll just say about the whole payment space is, it's just a really exciting time. I think, if you flash back probably 10 years ago, payments was something that only bankers and some other folks that were really deep in the space talked about. But, fintech and the payment space has become one of the most exciting, most innovative, most interesting areas in business today. And so it's just exciting to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rob, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know your time's very valuable, so I want to be appreciative of that. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me, Greg. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.